Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is Professor Senn from LA Pierce College, and today I'm going to be presenting a lesson on scientific writing. This is part of an assignment for the Journal of Advanced Technological Education undergraduate research experience, and I thought it would also be great to present this to my soil science students since we will be doing lab reports in the style of a journal article. So today we're going to focus on the formatting and style requirements for JATE. It is a journal which currently is free for undergraduates to publish their research and for faculty who do undergraduate research also to publish articles in this journal. We have some students at Pierce who are doing an undergraduate research experience and working on their papers, maybe similar to you. And today, these are the learning objectives that we're going to be going over. So after the completion of this lesson, you should be able to use a style guide to inform the citation and reference requirements for your target publication. We're going to be focusing on JATE today. Also, we'll use a style guide to inform the style and formatting requirements for your paper. You should be able to organize your own writing according to the basic components of a research paper, like all of those required sections. And you should be able to use professional prose and write concisely, communicate your research in the third-person passive voice, which we'll go over, and use grammar checking resources. So let's go ahead and get started with the general guidelines here. For this, you want to have all of the sections of your paper titled. Sometimes if you forget to title the sections, it might seem like a section of your paper is missing, or it might be confusing to the reader, for example, if they're wanting to go to your results first. So you're going to have all of the following sections in your paper: abstract, introduction, results and discussion, conclusions, the experimental section, also sometimes called the materials and methods, and your references. You're going to use formal professional prose. So consider if you were writing a report for your boss, that's the kind of language that you want to use. Consider that this would be a job that you actually want to keep. Okay. You're not going to use contractions. For example, you wouldn't simplify things by saying don't. You would say do not or did not. And you don't want to use colloquialisms or any type of cursing. So sometimes when we want to emphasize our point, we might say, something like that was one hell of an economic stimulus package. But in this situation with our research papers, we're not going to use any of those sort of slang or colloquial or cuss words. Similarly, there's a lot of nots here. Never use I or my. So you want to avoid the first person. Since you are working on your paper as part of a research group, it is okay to say we. We don't want to make the language so unnatural. So you can do that occasionally, but you don't want to refer to yourself or other individuals. When we're writing in third person, we also want to avoid saying the student, the experimenter, the researcher, the class, or even just one. Okay. At the same time, we also have to be clear and concise. So you want to use as few words as possible to get your point across, and try to make it as easy to understand as possible. So I do tell my students there are no extra points for making the paper as long as possible. You really want to keep your reader engaged, and if your paper is too long, you might lose them along the way. Also, for scientific writing, we're going to avoid using quotes. Here, you're going to paraphrase. One of the problems with using quotes is that it may involve some copying and pasting, whereas we'd really like to see your interpretation of that article or the concept that the author is trying to get across and how it relates to your article. So if you paraphrase, then you should, of course, restate the quote in your own words. That's what that means. And then you'll cite that reference. If you're citing it for JETE, then you're going to use the IEEE citation style. Okay, another general guideline here is that you need to proofread your work. So because this is supposed to be professional academic writing, spelling and grammar errors are not acceptable. You really want to strive for perfection. A couple of errors might want to get in, but we certainly don't want to do it on purpose or just be nonchalant about it. And when you proofread, you can use your spelling and grammar checker. For example, if you have Microsoft Word as part of your student account. And if you do that and you come across science words that are not in the dictionary, it's a good idea to go ahead and click add so that those spelling and grammar checks go a little bit more quickly as you continue to work on your paper throughout the semester. Okay, and then in terms of how sciencey or how technical you want your writing to be, you know, we want to avoid using jargon in the sense that it's better to explain what you mean than, you know, hiding behind these big scientific words. But you, in this case, for the journal article, you're writing it for a scientific article, or excuse me, scientific audience, not just the general public. So assume that the writer, assume that the reader is a scientist in your field, but doesn't know anything about your experiment. So you want to go ahead and explain everything fully. And here, don't make any assumptions that they know everything about your technique or the material that you're working with. Okay, so what are the required sections here for your journal article? First is the title. This is your first chance to get your reader's attention. So here, feel free to get creative. You want your title to be clear and accurate also, and to communicate what your paper is about. Of course, you're going to include the authors. So this would be yourself as well as your co-authors if you're working with a partner or a team. Next is the abstract. So this one is basically a summary of the entire paper. And even though it's the first section that the reader will see, it's typically written last because it's difficult to write a summary about something that you haven't written yet. So here, what's included in the summary will be the purpose of the study, the main results, and then your major conclusion or conclusions. It's usually about 200 words, 2 to 5 sentences. So you want to have a few sentences, and often the sentences that you choose can be taken from the topic sentences of your main paragraphs. So for example, you could take the topic sentence from your main paragraph of your results, your topic sentence from your introduction, where you give your purpose and your hypothesis, and then your topic sentence from your conclusion as well. So that's a good way to put together the abstract pretty quickly. All right, next is the introduction. So here, again, a chance to get the reader's attention, and here you're going to provide most of your background information. How does this study fit into the big picture? Why are you conducting the experiment? So all of this is kind of like the groundwork for the experiment itself, sometimes called the literature review, because you're going to review some articles, and those articles are going to inform you about what's happening in the field and what the current state of research is. So you could do that before you have your results of the experiment. It's never too early to get started. Here you want to include the background information. What is the purpose of the study? What are the objectives of the study? For example, what kind of scientific problem are you trying to address? And you should state your initial hypothesis. So here you can give your experimental strategy, just a brief description of what the experiment is, but you don't want to give too many details because those details belong in the materials and methods or experimental section. Usually in the introduction, you're going to use a lot of citations. That means you're going to cite a lot of articles, but don't include any results or conclusions here. Those are going to go in results and conclusions. Next is results and discussion. So you may have a separate result and discussion section. Many journals will combine them because it makes the results a little bit easier to understand if you're able to put them in context just a little bit. But here you're going to explain the experiment, how it worked, what happened, and then what the results mean. For example, if you had low, medium, or high levels of a certain analyte, but you're not going to make any judgments here. Those are going to go in the conclusion section. In the discussion, you can compare your results to other similar studies, and that's where you would also have some in-text citations where you're going to reference the articles that you read. Here, if there was anything that was inconclusive or didn't go as you expected or was inconsistent, that would be the place to mention that. Results are a great place to include your figures, your graphs, and your tables. In some instances, you might give photos from the experiment. You can create your own graphics, like a flow chart that explains, what happened. Okay, but like I mentioned, don't make judgment about the results. And here you're also going to have captions, so every figure will be titled and numbered. For example, like figure 1, figure 2, figure 3. All right, conclusion section is often pretty short. It might only be one paragraph. Here, you'll give a brief summary of the main findings and then why they're significant. So here, this is going to be the big picture conclusion. You can also suggest studies that could confirm your results or further studies that maybe come to mind. Maybe your results actually raise more questions and you have ideas for further studies. Research runs on funding. So if you don't have any further questions or further studies, then there's really no reason to continue. So we always do try to think of new potential questions and new experiments that we could conduct. Next is the experimental section. The experimental section is materials and methods. In some journals, it'll come after introduction. In other journals, it will be the very last section. This is often the most dry section because you're literally just describing what happened. For this section, you're going to use the third-person passive voice. We'll get into more of that in just a moment. And if you have a good lab notebook, then this section is pretty easy to write because you can practically just transcribe directly from your lab notebook to create this section. Next is the references section. So a really important part of science is that it's reproducible. So you want to give references for the techniques that you've given. For example, all of those in-text citations that you made for your introduction and conclusion, introduction, discussion, and conclusion, of course, will also be listed in the references section. So for JATE, the Journal of Advanced Technological Education, the references are in IEEE format. If you're writing research papers for your classes, you may see MLA, Modern Language Association, or ACS, which is American Chemical Society. And there are style guides for each of those. So we will talk a little bit about that next.